Great. We're back for part 3. We're going to check out another opera. This time it's going to be Dmitri Shostakovich's The Lady Macbeth. I found a really interesting talk by an opera company that has put together, obviously, Lady Macbeth for the stage, that goes through a couple of important thematic elements, plays through some of the piano score, and kind of illustrates some of the larger musical ideas that are happening. Because I don't have a piano at the ready, and I'm a terrible pianist anyway, I'm going to have us listen and obviously watch some of this synopsis by this musical and sort of opera director, Robert Carson. So again, we're going to go through the main characters, the storyline, some of the musical ideas, and then we're going to talk about what was really problematic about this opera and why Stalin had an issue with it. Dmitri Shostakovich was just up and coming in his career at this point. He was in his 30s when he had this huge success with Lady Macbeth, and it had gone through a number of performances, obviously, before Stalin got to it. But from that point on, became really self-conscious, and for good reason, in terms of expressing his musical ideas, because he was under the constant surveillance and watch of the Communist Party. In any event, so this piece comes about. It's set for the stage, and it premieres in 1934. Very interesting in terms of timeline. This is obviously then post World War I. So that the temperature in the room is way different than that of Richard Strauss's Salome. We're going to hear a lot of the same kind of musical qualities, though. This reach back to Romanticism, the large orchestra, the lush colors, the care for extended techniques, and this very cinematic feel, because obviously we're talking about the operatic medium. There's also going to be, the scene that I'm showing you that's going to be problematic is an extended instrumental scene, just like it is in Salome. So it's not as though it's devoid of programmatic context, but it's interesting that some of the more problematic pieces within these operas that we were taking a look at are not, they don't have text. They're just instrumental and acoustic. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch a synopsis of Lady Macbeth, and have someone else talk a little bit more with a piano to help illustrate some of these details. I'll pick up where he leaves off before we drop right into the end of Act 1 of Lady Macbeth. Hold on one moment while I share my screen.
Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk district was written by a 26-year-old Dmitri Shostakovich. He wrote it in different locations across Russia in the early 1930s, and then played 2 major theaters against each other: the Nemirovich-Danchenko Theater in Moscow, the place to be for avant-garde opera, and the Mikhailovsky Theater, the opera house in Leningrad. In the end, the opera was performed in 2 different productions in the 2 places within 2 days, in January 1934. Incredible.
This is a fascinating, unbelievably powerful piece, and I think of all the composers whose work we're looking at, I mean, Shostakovich's work being banned quite shortly after it had this double premiere in St. Petersburg and Moscow, banned in the country where it was performed, it becomes an intense political statement reflecting what was happening in the Russia of that period.
Stalin was not very happy about this opera and its subversive subject matter, and was disgusted by it, and actually, for a time, destroyed Shostakovich's career. This type of theater was unseemly, disgusting. Shostakovich had found the story in Nikolai Leskov's 19th century novella, illustrated by his good friend, the painter Kustodiev. In the novel, Katerina Ismailova is a bored housewife, unhappily married to the merchant Zinovy. While he is away, she falls in love with his worker Sergei, and together they murder her controlling and terrifying father-in-law, Boris, after he becomes suspicious. When Zinovy returns, the couple kill him too and plan to marry. In the novel, Katerina is shown being taken over by her passion, going as far as killing a child to remain in possession of her husband's estate and being able to marry her lover. But Shostakovich softens this aspect of the story. In his opera, we feel for Katerina. We understand her boredom, and we can't help but empathize with her suffering. In this first aria, Katerina is alone in her bedroom. When we hear the title, Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, it conjures up all kinds of images. But she hasn't committed murder yet. We have tremendous sympathy for her. In this aria, she's lamenting her loveless, stifling marriage to the boring Zinovy and the intrusive watch of Boris, her controlling father-in-law. Boris is a horrific personality and is making eyes at her all the time. There's an element of abuse or potential abuse that is there from the get-go. After witnessing a fight between Zinovy's workers and the newcomer, Sergei, she wishes someone would pay attention to her and comfort her. This Sergei will eventually become her lover. She sings this aria. She talks about the animal kingdom and how they mate, and why can't she do the same, frankly? But it's set in the most gorgeous musical environment, with these very, very dark chords. Very Russian it is. She sings this arching melody.
The tension that then resolves to consonants, dissonance, so consonants.
Arches again.
Also kind of upsetting. Oh, we have a relief. This is major. Major as well.
Such a fantastic melodist. We don't expect that from a supposedly modern composer.
Tension building intense. And we get back to
But things heat up, and she says, "No man stretches his hand out to grasp me. No man presses his burning mouth on mine."
Very romantic.
And then she goes up for the big high note. It's as if she's a burning cauldron and things are just simmering and waiting to explode volcanically. Shostakovich conjures this up with very, very simple means, quite simple chords, but accelerating the tempo, then slowing it down, and then accelerating the tempo again. And we're left with a very, very uneasy feeling about what's going to happen to this character. But she inspires our sympathy. She really, really does. She will go on to kill not only her husband, but her father-in-law, and somehow will enjoy the journey.
Very good. So, A lot of really intense things happen in Shostakovich's setting of this narrative. One of the things that Stalin was so upset about is this very extended sex scene that happens in the opera. It happens pretty early in the opera too. It's at the end of Act 1. What's happening? Our main character, she's giving herself up to her lover, Sergei, and she is really at the whims of her passions here. And Stalin definitely felt that this scene was like probably borderline unnecessary, overly romantic and romanticized. He thought the whole opera lacked what was really essential to what the party was putting forth, was this idea of realism, right? Of specifically Soviet Russian realism. And Shostakovich is an interesting composer because he uses a lot of Russian kind of folk melodies in his piece. And these chords that tend to accompany folk melodies that are simple chords that are from a tonal language. However, as I kind of pointed out, in addition to like supplementing this video, that there are so many moments of tension that like beg for release within the harmonic language of the opera. So it gives us this feeling that the main character is incredibly distraught, and perhaps emotionally turbulent, and not in a particularly like steady frame of mind, but it's going to be quite a journey, whatever we end up seeing. So what do I want to show you? Of course, I would love to show you the end of Act 1, where she gives herself up to Sergei in this extended like sex scene, which there's a little bit of nudity, women people, you know, from the front up, nothing too scandalous. There's not a ton of offerings of this opera that have English subtitles. In fact, if you're interested in this opera, there's the film version that I'm going to show you a selection of is fantastic. Really, really riveting with some great acting and wonderful singing. Without further ado, let me drop you into that. Again, pay attention to the harmonic language, the idea that like the melody is continuing to like push and pull, ebb and flow, and that we have this like really, really dramatic structure that feels very Romantic era, but has a lot of the language that is more associated with elements of the Second Viennese School, like some very tension-ridden, dissonant events. Hold on while I pull this up. Okay, here we go. We're dropping into somewhere towards the end of Act 1. Not quite really the end of Act 1. We're definitely in Act 1. We're gonna have a lot of music that like feels tense and then resolution, tense and then resolution. Minor chords that then resolve to major chords, then minor again. This comes like back and forth, back and forth. Kind of appropriate for the scene we're listening and watching. Leitmotivically, we hear her melody that we were privy to earlier in the opera. really high cello solo, very soulful. Color is incredibly expressive. The rest of the ensemble is supporting it. Homophonic texture. Call and response now with another string instrument. Again, they're communicating on stage. There's communication happening non-verbally. The underscoring happens, right? The music tells us something is wrong before they even speak it, right?
Тебе опять мерещится.
This like probably like heartbeat.
Свой кто-нибудь. Слышишь? Идет кто-то.
Слышу.
Спрячься где-нибудь. Это Зиновий Борисыч. Мой муж.
Вот тебе бабушка и
Asking
говорит.
for it.
Прячься, прячься.
You have to like build that tension, right? The music is a lot of talking for her at this moment.
У двери подслушивает, сволочь. Ну подожди.
Oh, I love that last moment. That text where she calls him swine. Oh, so good. Okay, anyway. Stalin had a big problem with that moment. It was probably staged really sexily as well. But beyond that, the music is doing a lot to illustrate what we don't see. And that's a really, really powerful tool, and one that you can use harmony to help express this idea that like when we were done with that, like that very sweet scene between the two of them, immediately like our chord came back to something that was very minor, something very morose sounding, something ominous. We have some percussion instruments, very colorful use of the orchestra, very standard for the Romantic era, something that obviously like Shostakovich is trying to give a call back to, but using a lot of the harmonic language that is more commonly obviously associated with the 20th century. So that's a little bit on Shostakovich's work. Sorry, I misspoke. This premiered when he was in his 20s, and it was done in the 30s. Even so, like, wow, Shostakovich was so young to have like two opera companies essentially really interested and also like perform these works simultaneously with two very different stagings. Too bad that Stalin did not see the artistic merit in them, mostly because they were against kind of what the party was for. And as a result, like Shostakovich's career was dampened, certainly. He has a very interesting and impressive compositional output. So if you enjoyed some of the music here, I would definitely check out some of his other works. In particular, I am a fan of his string quartet number 8. All 5 movements are really very cinematic sounding and very, very fun to listen to in a dark kind of way. In any event, we're going to turn our attention to popular music. Now, we're going to listen to one jazz piece, Love for Sale, performance. It's done by Ella Fitzgerald. It's a Cole Porter tune about prostitution, and two other selections from the popular music genre. We're going to talk about Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax, which is from the 1980s, and then Chuck Berry's Maybelline, which is from the early part of the rock and roll era in the 1950s. Both of those later selections not outlawed, but rather banned by the BBC. So looking forward to coming back to the 20th century in our 4th and final installment. I will see you guys in a moment.